Hello, everyone. I'm Guy, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Charlie, and the managers, Maurizio, Kevin, Paul, and Jerry. You know them from previous roundtables, and today is our last roundtable of 2025, and there will be more coming in 2026. Welcome, gentlemen. I think we can jump into it right away. I'll pass it to you, Maurizio. You can start with our first topic of discussion.
Thank you, Guy. So the first topic I wanted to talk about is that I've seen a shift in the job description recently on many job boards globally. It's related to the duty and the role, different roles that are coming up so. Before we used to have the field service engineer, then was developing to a team leader or taking the path of a specialized in as specialist in the technical side, then would go up to manager position. But I see a lot of advertisement job description at the moment where maybe due to the lack of field service engineers available, these are changing. So the position is mentioned as a service management position, but still the duty are related to a field service engineering position. So I was wondering if this is something that you're also seen. Do you think anything about? Have you seen? Maybe that's the reason why we're missing field service engineers. This availability which triggers this change suddenly in the positions.
Yeah, I have seen it in the recent times, and actually, one of the job openings that I applied to required technical knowledge from the manager and involvement in supporting the team with maybe remote troubleshooting and potentially on-site troubleshooting. I've seen this. In my case, it was kind of the role that the last manager played, and it became an expectation. So that's what I have seen, but I will pass it to the other managers to give us their input. Maybe we can start with you, Jerry.
I have not seen that, to be honest. We see a lot of candidates in the market right now because of, I know there's been, especially in my market, there's been a contraction on the customer side in the biopharma market. So we seem to be getting a lot more resumes than we usually get. But I will say in the past few years, we've gone the other way. We've really tried to isolate the field engineer to focus on technical tasks, purely technical tasks, removing from them any kind of remote support they were doing or dispatching. So we've built teams around the engineer like an envelope of support to really allow them to focus, because our products are in some cases heavily engineered, so they're not configured products, so they're very customized projects. So we've invested in dispatching, in installation coordinators, in project managers, technical support, to try to take those things off the plate of the engineer. When the organization was smaller, we saw the engineers doing, chief cook and bottle washer, right? They're doing a little bit of everything, which diluted their efficiency. So we've seen the utilization go up, and it's been better overall for the organization.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yep.
Paul, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think Jerry, you've hit the nail on the head. Is a lot depends on the size of the organization, doesn't it? If you're a startup or a very small organization, then everybody has to do a bit of everything, and the luxury of having separate teams is probably beyond you. But once you get to that critical mass where you've got lots of people doing things, then I can't help feeling that organisations that are asking service managers to be engineers are looking to do it on the cheap. And they're not recognising the difference between an engineer, a supervisor, and a manager. And there are specific tasks that each one would be expected to do, particularly as the organisation gets much, much bigger. And I wonder, would they ask any other organisation to do the same? If they looked in their commercial organisations, would they see the same structure? Would they be asking their commercial leaders to be a sales representative with a target on their back, as well as managing an entire region? I don't think I've ever seen that in a large organisation. So I do wonder. I do have a certain amount of cynicism, but that's probably perhaps me late on a very disgustingly weather afternoon in the UK. So just before Christmas. So maybe I'm the Grinch.
And that's okay. Just to mention to the audience that we are in different locations in the world. Charlie's in the UK, Paul is in the UK, Jerry's in the US, Maurizio is in Germany, Kevin is in Switzerland, and I am in Canada. So, but although we are in different regions, which is great for the insights that we are presenting, some of the managers here have global and regional responsibilities. So although they are located maybe on one continent, their reach is further away. Kevin, what have you seen from your end?
Yeah, I also haven't seen any job descriptions change in the effort to attract people. But I agree with Paul. It's very difficult for us to have a service manager doing service engineer work as well. I think you need that distinction and separate the job roles. Otherwise, it kind of feels like you're taking advantage of someone's prior technical skills, but then giving them additional work on the side as well. So what I have noticed is we're struggling to attract service engineers now. I think for a variety of reasons. And it's interesting. I was chatting to a friend yesterday, actually, who's job hunting right now, and he explained something to me that I hadn't even been aware of, and it's something we probably need to look into. Is a lot of companies use AI now to pass CVs, right? They do the first review using AI before it even reaches a human's hands. And one of the options you get when you apply for a job is to upload your resume, your CV, and then AI will analyze it and then move you on to the next stage. And what my friend told me yesterday was that a lot of times he's noticed when his CV is uploaded, a lot of the fields are filled in incorrectly on the website, and it automatically rejects him for an interview. So he never gets to speak to somebody. So I think that's something we need to look at. And if I was giving advice to anyone applying for a job right now, it would be fill in your details manually on the website, regardless of how slow and painful that may be, because you probably increase your chances of getting to speak to somebody on the other side. So I was a little bit surprised about that. It's something I'm going to look into with our talent team as well to see whether that's an actual issue for us and preventing us getting candidates, because I've definitely seen a drop in people applying for some of the engineering jobs right now.
Yeah. Kevin, you brought up very good points about field service engineers, candidacy, and applications. Before we get into that further, I want to pass it to Charlie, maybe to have his input on what he has seen recently.
Thanks, Guy. So I would say I think it's not that common that you get this kind of advertisement that you want a manager, but actually you want a field service engineer. But I have seen it. I think there are two points that I would make. I think one of those is, I think if you're a field service engineer, the attraction of having a field service manager title, even if your duties don't necessarily involve that much management, I can see that that's an attraction, because people look at titles. There's no getting around it. People do look at titles first. If you've got a CV and you can say, yeah, I've been field service manager, and then it's buried in there that you've actually done very little in terms of management, I think you're still gonna find that as an attractive alternative. So I think there is something around that. I would also say that it's been already said that the scale of the organization matters. I refer to this as player managers. So if you look at some of the lower league soccer clubs, and I use soccer because we've got an international audience, or football clubs, it's only the lower leagues that have a manager who also occasionally runs on the pitch. I think it's for most organizations, I think it's a really bad idea, because I think you end up doing neither role particularly well. Either, as a field service engineer who's not always in the field, or a manager who doesn't have time to meet with their team and actually, do some of the stuff that management requires that time for. So, I think it's not that common, but I do see it. and I think it is a bit of an issue, but I can see why organizations do it and why field service engineers are attracted to those kind of roles.
Yeah, just to add another thought about that, what happens sometimes is that when a field service engineer is promoted to management, their comfort zone is staying within the technical aspect of the job. And that's what I encountered with the recent opportunity. That person was so comfortable that he continued doing that side of his responsibility and maybe put his management responsibility on the side and did not maybe give it enough attention. That's something I have seen. But also to your initial point, Maurizio, I've seen job descriptions mentioning the requirement of the manager having that technical background, not only to be able to manage the team properly, but also to be involved in the troubleshooting and in the whole process of service. We know managers get involved in escalations because they have to manage them, they have to oversee them and make sure that the process is followed until full resolution. So that's my additional take on this. Just to wrap up that topic, Maurizio, if you have anything just to wrap up this specific topic.
One thing came to my mind and related to what you said. I think it really depends on the kind of equipment, and the cost of this equipment that tells us, this kind of shift. What I've seen, for example, these job descriptions were all related to small equipment, so range like €5,000, $5,000, right? If you go up to like 50 or 500, maybe the split between the roles and the position is much more clear. But if you go down to an equipment where you don't sell one in a year, two in a year, but you just have to sell like thousands, that's a total different service model. That's a totally different sales model as well, especially food equipment, tech food equipment.
Mhm.
So the job descriptions were really as service manager, and that relates to what Charlie said. It's the title, but then you look really through the lines and it's just a hands-on work with no team leading, no responsibility of a budget, no responsibility of distributors. It's just a really hands-on work, which of course it's a field service engineering normal job, installing, maintaining and repairing. That was the topic.
Yeah. It's a strange time we're going through now, and I think the next topic maybe will add to the picture that we're trying to depict, and which is the lack of field service engineers in the field. So Maurizio, I'll let you start with this. Probably it's something that is near and dear to your heart.
Well, my straight answer or my straight thought would relate to the traveling. I think the traveling also, when I've been doing interviews in the past, was one of my first questions. How long do I have to travel? How long will I be away from home, from family? So I think maybe it has to do with the new generations who don't want to travel as much as we used to do, or for that amount of time. So they want to be away from friends, from families, from their normal daily situation, just for a short amount of time. I think this is the huge driver in the decisions that people are taking nowadays when they decide to become a field service engineer, rather than choose some other kind of position, more on the strategical side, on the leading side. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Maurizio. We'll go with Jerry. What have you seen about that?
Well, yeah, I think it's people coming into the market. We don't see a lot of the field engineers we see are more seasoned field engineers, right? There used to be more technical schools, technical colleges around, at least where I am, that don't exist anymore. So it's interesting. We did a whole review of our team talent. So many have engineering degrees, which is, I wouldn't say overqualified, but at a much different level than when I started, when people were coming in with associate's degrees or like a technical trade school or military training. So a lot of people are coming to us as field engineers because they've had difficulty finding roles as engineers. Also, I've read that the younger generation is focusing more on life, work-life balance, and it's more toward, life experiences than focusing on a career. So people are more reluctant to, take on some of the heavy travel requirements that a field engineer has. So we've really had to focus on localizing. Some of our products require specialists, and we don't have specialists in every region. So these guys travel a lot. But we're really trying to put engineers closer to the customer when we map out a territory to minimize overnight travel, to try to make it more of a regular cadence for them, right? And to try to help bridge that gap between work-life balance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not an easy choice of a career, and as you and Maurizio mentioned, maybe the new generation is more focused on their well-being and personal life, and we always talk about work-life balance. So companies have to take that into consideration. Paul, what have you seen?
Yeah, it is a challenging one because I faced it when attempting to recruit the lack of people applying for field service engineer jobs. The cause is really easy to identify. Field service engineers are getting older, as are we all, and they are retiring, and so that's the cause. The challenge is really to understand why. Why are people younger not wanting to go into a field service engineering style role? And I think we've hit upon some of the reasons. Education is certainly one of them. A lack of technical education has been pervaded most countries where we've tended to go, and we have made it glamorous, in fact, almost mandatory to get some form of academic qualification. And as Jerry says, how many of the field service engineers we today look at that are great have got a phenomenal academic background? The answer probably very few, because it's a different role. I'm not sure it's solely the new generation. I think we tend to blame the generations coming for the ills of the world, whether it's bring with them social media, mobile phones, or whatever. I can remember back to sort of like the pandemic, and I hate to sort of go back to the pandemic, but I can remember going for a walk when we were allowed just to get out of our houses, and I could see lots of farmers, and this is not intended to be sexist, but it is just a fact. Most field service engineers, I think about 80% of field service engineers are men. There was lots of farmers in the park kicking a ball around or pushing a small child on a swing. And my comment to my wife then was, when this all finishes, how many of those people are going to want to go back to a role which meant at this time that they were still hundreds of miles away from home, or they were stuck on a motorway somewhere? And I do wonder whether that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the law of unintended consequences, is that people are choosing to say this role is no longer glamorous. What I find really fascinating is the fact that the industry is bemoaning the lack of field service engineers, but field service engineer pay doesn't seem to have risen. Now, in any capitalist society, and I think we're all in capitalist countries, be that as what you may, the law says that we should see the pay go up. It doesn't seem to be. And that's interesting. I think that organizations are still reluctant to recognize they've got a problem. In a matter of years, we are going to have a situation where there is simply nobody to do that job. So what are we going to do as the organizations? And as we said previously, AI can do a lot, but it can't hold a screwdriver.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet.
I don't think we will see it in our time.
I
But
think that'll be long gone by the time that happens. Yeah.
yeah, but you brought up an important point, Paul, which is the compensation package for the field engineering jobs. And I've seen the whole spectrum. I've seen companies that reward field engineers very well, and some others that don't. So I guess this problem is more prominent in the organizations that do not really reward field engineers for the difficult lifestyle, because we know what it is. you might get a call and then you have to pack and go for a week. You might get a call at 8 o'clock in the evening and you have to go and service the equipment because it's a critical equipment. So for many reasons, it makes this career, the field engineering career, a demanding one. And, people who go into it know what it takes, and sometimes they are reluctant. Sometimes they choose to be on the phones, technical support. So, Kevin, how is it on your end?
Yeah, I see similar things as well. I mean, we're definitely seeing a drop in younger people applying for jobs, and I think there's a few factors that play there. I mean, one is there's so many more educational opportunities now, not even necessarily college and degree routes, but there's a lot of specialist schools and a lot of different opportunities with all the technology breakthroughs, with the internet, with everything else that's going on right now. People have other options than just the traditional industries, and then post-pandemic, the option to work from home and work remotely, like even if your employees in a different country, it's opened up so many new opportunities that never existed prior to like 2020. And now I think people are naturally, if I can stay at home all day and still get paid well and just log on at hours that suit me, why wouldn't you take that? And I kind of admire the new generations, millennials and Gen Zs, with their focus on their well-being and I hate the term work-life balance, because everything's just life and work becomes part of it. But they focus on what makes them happy, right? And it traditionally, field service engineers, it's a pretty demanding job profile with the travel and being on call and giving up your weekends and all that. And I can see why people aren't necessarily attracted to it anymore. So yeah, it's a struggle. And then our other key pipeline for people was military. Like particularly in the US, in our industry, we take on a lot of military people, and we're seeing that drop off as well now. It's not just young people we're failing to attract; it's also the military, because there's so many better paid jobs out there in other industries now. It's hard to attract them. And you're right, the rate of pay hasn't kept up with the work that's expected of people. And we give pay rises every year, but inflation is going up way faster than any pay rise we can give, so it's difficult to attract people financially, and it's difficult to attract people, for the perks of the job, or the travel and everything else now, because attitudes are changing towards that with sustainability and the work from home thing. It's tricky. It's a tricky environment to walk through right now.
It is. What I have seen also recently, I was talking to a field engineer from the field engineer community, and he is so good at what he does that he is the one who picks up most of the jobs, and he's the one who travels 3 weeks every month away from his family and his kids. So it's like it's a blessing that you know your job well, you do it very well, but that attracts all the workload on your shoulders. And this is where managers need to be careful so that the workload is evenly distributed across the team, but also the expertise, the knowledge is fully distributed across the team. Because what if that field engineer needs to take some vacation, or God forbids he leave the company, and now the team is left without that expertise. So I think it's also a management gap that the manager needs to look at and make sure that the team is fully trained and the coverage geographically is evenly distributed, so that all the field engineers in that team do have an evened out workload, and the risk is minimized, retention is stronger, because for how long can that field engineer sustain that workload and spending 3/4 of his time away from his home and his family? I'll pass it to Charlie now. What have you seen on your end?
One thing I'm mindful of is that we don't have any representation of younger generation here, and a lot of what we're talking about is the younger generation.
Too fast, Charlie.
Yeah, I'm not that young anymore, but we seem to touch on that every round table. Anyway, so I think one thing is perhaps a shout out to the community who's listening to this. Those young engineers who have found this a rewarding endeavor. What is it that attracted them to field service engineering in the first place? So I'm curious to hear that. I think when I've been recruiting, I found markets a lot different. So mostly in the past, I haven't struggled to recruit. Now that may have been the organizations, they may have had some wealth behind them or something that was particularly attractive, whether that's a package or whether that's the technology. I did, there are some countries that were more difficult to fill the FSE roles, but I think we haven't touched on the onus of an organization to make sure they're getting their job adverts right. We need to make sure that we're attracting the right people in the first place to hit apply. And I see a lot of job adverts that are already putting people off. Whether it's a requirement for a degree when actually oftentimes you don't necessarily need a degree to do a first or entry level field service engineer job. Sure, it helps if you've got that technical background, but I've seen some great nurses with no background in technology come in and do absolutely brilliant work because they can interact with lab staff on a clinical level and then deliver. They can learn the technical stuff. So I think one onus should be on the organizations to make sure we are getting the job adverts right and attracting the right people. The other thing I would say is that we in one of my more recent roles, we had a graduate entry scheme. So we went out and we deliberately pitched to graduates and we gave them an opportunity, not just in field service, but to have a wealth of different experience. Try a few months here, do a secondment there, try out all different things within an organization, and that attracts young, bright people who aren't sure what they want to do, and gives them the opportunity to try a few things. And then the final thing I would say is, we've talked about the negative side of field service. Yes, there might be long hours. Yes, there might be travel away from family and friends. But there is an awful lot of upside. When I was starting out, I got to travel the world and it was brilliant. Someone else was paying and someone else was paying for my meals, and I got to see the world, and it was a fantastic experience, and I wouldn't change it for the world. Yeah, it had an impact on my social life. Yes, I didn't get to see all the friends all the time, but I would say there was plenty of reward that goes with it. So I think it's really up to us to sell the upside of field service engineering as well, and not just talk about the negatives. So I think there's plenty of good stuff out there, but I think we do need to do a better job of selling this as a good opportunity, and maybe a correction in terms of compensation.
Yeah. I see we are 6 on the call, and each one of us brought something different than the other managers. And this is how these talks that we put out are really valuable, because we have different perspectives, different experiences. And I hope that the community sees this and benefits from it. Maurizio, any last words to conclude this topic?
No, it's, nice, very nice. All the things that you said, perfect, spot on. And this goes all back to, why did we start this job? No? Why did we want to see the world and travel? And I can also remember my first job was like 3 months away. So 3 months, huge crawler cranes. But the beauty was that at the end of the 3 months, you would sit on the top of the hill with a beer, and you would look at the crawler crane and say, I did that, together with other people, of course. But it's a kind of like, you put your things in your pocket and you bring it home, to your friends, to your family. You talk about this huge experience. And this was the beauty, at least for me at that time, when I started in this job. And then, of course, knowing the technology, different technologies, and this was also the beauty, to be kind of a specialist and have to do with tools. Now it became much more, software, a lot of expensive administrative things and tools and software. It's a bunch of things nowadays, much more complicated, I think, also to be a a proper field service engineer. It's not just fixing the equipment, it's all the rest that's behind, the soft skills and the customer, the survey, the comeback. So it's a totally different job, I think, nowadays.
Yeah, and also the satisfaction. You get your satisfaction, your reward from attacking problems, fixing them, and seeing the impact on the customers. In addition, as you said, Maurizio, to the soft skills that you develop with, talking with people and the experiences of travel. I learned about Canada simply by being a field engineer and traveling the whole country. And this is very much rewarding, as you said.
Yeah.
I think we can switch now to another topic. Paul, I'll let you lead with that. It's about field engineers training.
Yeah, so one of the topics that I've been discussing with a few people, both on this community and in others, is about two parts of training. So the first is the way we discuss entrance into the community, field service engineers and technicians coming into our organisations. I frequently hear organisations bemoan the lack of certain skills of these individuals entering the marketplace. And we hear a lot from our governments about the state of education, the cost of education, etc. And so the question I have is, each side seems to be blaming the other, saying you should do more. The result is the organisations end up having to spend money teaching these people basic things that you might have expected a school to do or a college to do. But they don't want to either because they're cash strapped. So how are we going to solve this problem? Do you see this? And the other part was then the ongoing training. I mean, Richard Branson once famously said something along the lines of, and apologies to Branson if I get this wrong, train people so they can lead, but treat them so well that they don't. And there has never been a more truer phrase about staff, and it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or anything in an organisation. We really seem to be having a challenge where the first thing that's going in organisational budgets is training. And then we wonder why people leave the organisation to companies that are offering future training. So I just wondered what the community had seen themselves about both entrants coming in. Do you see them as unskilled, as others are saying? And how have you found ongoing training? Are you being challenged? Have you been challenged?
Yeah. Kevin?
Yeah, I think, well, at least in the company I work in, we have some quite stringent requirements about what you can and can't do when you apply for jobs. So most of the people that come in are well qualified to do them, I think. So we don't have to spend much time training the basics, but we do have to send them on very specific product training. And like the typical ramp up time for a new service engineer or a new installation engineer in our organization is anywhere between 6 months and 12 months before they're proficient to go out solo and work. But what I've seen is we have again, back to the pandemic again, where everything changed and we couldn't send people to classrooms and everything was done virtually. We switched over to didactic learning and everything was online and remote. And because it saves money, we try and do more and more of it. And now it feels like we're almost overloading people with training because it's online and that's easy to deploy. And it's very hard to get people into a classroom where they get to mingle with other humans and build networks and get real hands-on with the products. And it's really hard, particularly on some of our products, which are so complex. It's really hard to do everything virtually to get, to improve your skills as an engineer. So I'm kind of seeing it from that viewpoint. It's like I really want people to go back to a classroom every few years and get the latest product training and actually sit there with other people and network. Because I remember when I joined the organization, and this goes back to what Charlie says, we should probably promote what we do a little bit more, a little bit better. And because I loved it when I joined as an engineer, and 2 weeks after joining, they shipped me out to California for a couple of weeks and put me up in a hotel and gave me a car, and I went to class every day and learned about radiation safety and all these kind of things. And it was amazing. And they gave me a laptop and a phone, and I felt I'd hit the jackpot after being in the military for so long. And now we onboard people, and they might not go anywhere for 6 months. They might have to just sit at home and do online training after online training. And I don't think it's a great way to learn, and especially you don't build that camaraderie with your fellow engineers, which is so important. I'm still good friends with everybody I did my initial training with. I spent 3 or 4 months in California over the first year. And all of those people that were in my training are pretty much still in the company, all at various different levels now, but we all stay in touch, and they're sounding boards for us, and their experience we can use. And in a pinch, I can borrow them to come and do some work for me or whatever, or help them out. And I think you miss that with the ways that companies try to hire now and try to cut costs by doing a lot of things virtually.
Yeah, and I think one thing I learned from hands-on training is that this is the place to make mistakes. It's not the place to make mistakes at customer sites. So that's why training with hands-on is so important, because you get to touch the parts, see the modules, work with them, make mistakes, learn from your mistakes before you go to customer sites and start practicing what you learned theoretically. I mean, it can be combined online and then hands-on, but for field engineers, especially for servicing, maybe not for selling, it's very important to have hands-on. Maurizio, what's your take on that?
So just one thing that came to my mind, does anyone of you in your companies work with this, I don't know, it's called the 3D reality goggles, that you wear?
Virtual reality, yeah.
Augmented reality, yeah.
Because this is a huge switch. I had the chance to be part of for one company I was working for, where the company said, okay, we don't train anymore. We send a box. We send the box to a distributor, someone who had, of course, the basic, right, the knowledge, electromechanical knowledge, but didn't know much of that product in particular. And then you can see a document, project a document, put arrows and point to the correct parts in your equipment. And I was amazed from one side. From the other side, I was we're not there yet. The amount of time that took this person to fix the equipment because of all the the commands and the suggestions was huge, right? It was kind of like training on the job someone to repair the instrument. So I thought, okay, there's a huge gap between what the company is doing, the way they're training, that they want to train the model they are using, and how the field works, right? And so I'm really with you. So hands-on training is, of course, where you can do everything. You can test, you can see the small things, you can really think with your fingers, right? I remember one of the interview question that I've got as an interview was, please, can you put your hand like this, right? And I see if it shakes or not. So it tells me exactly how steady you are when you are dealing with such, I don't know, small microfluidics, pipes and pneumatics and so on. So it's something. It changes completely the feeling.
Yeah, definitely. Jerry?
The benefit of going last. So all the guys, Kevin, Paul, Maurizio, you've made good points that coalesce in one idea in my head. So first, yeah, since the pandemic, the company has pushed more virtual training, online training. It's cheaper. It's more pervasive. There's just my inbox is full of trainings, as a manager that I have to do. And you start to become numb to it. And certainly in field service, it makes it more difficult to do any kind of technical training remotely. But I think people thought there was a panacea of opportunity to do all this online training, but it's diluted the skills in my mind, right? And we're coming to a point of saturation where we really have to walk it back. And to Paul's point, we as a service organization have had to invest more on our own to augment our in-person training. I set up a training center. I'm investing in equipment. Scheduling, training managers, we really are pushing the hands-on training that the company's kind of gotten away from. And to Maurizio's point, we spent a lot of money on augmented reality using the HoloLens, the Microsoft HoloLens. Came up with a couple of problems there. You need somebody to create the content and to manage it in the background, but also in my industry, customers were really gung-ho about it until their IT departments and their regulatory team said, nope, cannot have a third party running around with a camera on site.
Yeah.
And even though the department heads we were dealing with were more than happy to enable it, they were shut down by their IT departments because they wouldn't allow us. And we invested in all these gateways that would create a dedicated pipe through the firewall that the customer could control. Nope. And it was a shame. But people are, at least in some senior management in my company, said they don't understand why this is not more accepted. And it is as a technology, but there are more other concerns that really prevent it from being adopted widespread. So again, we have to fall back on in-person training. And what I'll also say is how effective the training is. What is the regular cadence of training, proficiency? We've invested in a layer of employee called the tactical operations specialist. And these are people in the field that are, let's call them mentors, that will go on site with somebody fresh out of training or seeing a product for the first time. And it's not just from a technical side, but it could be from any operational issues that the employee may need to get past. This person is there as kind of a mentor, because you can't just send them out in the field trained. They either have to shadow an experienced field engineer or have somebody else there to help bridge the gap between the theoretical and the practical, right? And it also creates a feedback loop. Is the training effective enough? Are we training on the right topics? Did we emphasize the right tasks in the training? So yeah, it's become a bigger point for us now to have to invest more heavily in the future on how we do service training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Charlie?
So I think a lot of it's been said. There are 2 points I will add, and that is, I think, to look at the people who are coming into an organization and don't necessarily have the right skills. Clearly the onus has got to be on that organization to upskill them. But I don't know how easy or how quickly it is to change curriculum in schools and universities to get what we want out of that. I think that's a challenge. I don't have an answer for how we address that. And then I think the other point I would make is I do see a bit of a mismatch between training budgets and the cost of courses that are required, particularly external courses. So your training budget might be whatever it is, but just to do one training course, that budget just doesn't cover a single course. Internally, obviously, you have control over these things, but externally, I do see that is a big challenge for a lot of organizations, and that is the sad fact. You're absolutely right, Paul. When it comes to cost cutting, training budgets are fairly early to go, and what can we do about that? Well, healthier, better economic situation would be great, but again, it's a challenge that as individuals, I'm not sure we have very much control over. We have difficult choices to make when it comes to budgets, and sometimes it's the training budget that gets hit early on.
True. And about that, what I have seen, and it really puzzled me, a field engineer that was flown from Canada to the US for training, zero hands-on. The trainer opened the instrument. This is the reading module. This is the robotic arm. This is the computer. And, that was the training. They didn't even open a PM kit to let the field engineer in training perform a PM. And we said earlier, this is where you're allowed to make mistakes because there's a trainer, there's an instructor that can help you understand your mistakes and prevent them in the future. What I've seen also is some organizations that pushed field engineers to the field without training just because, right? It might not be cost, but they want the engineer to be productive already. And sometimes they send them for back-to-back training, no gap in between because the company sells different kind of equipment and they want the engineer to be fully trained in the shortest possible time and go out and do service. And we know that some customers and even auditors require certification of training before you can even touch the instrument. And if you have certificates but you haven't practiced, guess where the engineer will make mistakes? At the customer sites. So back to you, Paul, to wrap up this topic and conclude.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? We focus probably on internal training, so once people have actually joined the organization, but that's fine. Maybe it was too big for a single question. What's coming across loud and clear is that the training budgets are being hit. I wonder the cynic in me says that if we're all going to the board to ask for more money, a brand new virtual reality AI project looks far more interesting for the board to consider than, oh, let's do some more training for our field service team. Now, the question would be, which would be actually more beneficial to the top line and the bottom line? I would argue the training is easy to cut and very difficult to replace. And I think possibly that means that some of the people who are in charge of organizations do not have as good a handle on what their service organizations bring to their organization. And that's worrying, because we've been saying this for 20, 30 years, that this is the same question. And why is that? So maybe the training that we're missing actually is some of our senior executives and board members onto what exactly does a field service engineer do. Maybe if they actually spent a couple of days riding around with one, and seeing what they do and seeing the interactions they have with the customer that pays the bills, they might have a different opinion of what do they need. If they are floundering, as you've suggested, Guy, after they've been sent out to service something without the correct training, then maybe they would change their mind.
Very true. And sometimes people making decisions are not in touch with the reality. And that takes us back to challenges with retention of engineers. The person I mentioned who was only shown the instrument didn't last more than a couple of months in the company and moved on. So what about retention of customers when they see that the engineer is coming in 3 times to fix one problem? They will guess that either the engineer is not good at what he does, or his training was not good to give him the tools and the knowledge to fix the problem on the first visit. And this is where cutting down on budget hurt the company and hurt the customers. Sometimes they cut down on parts. Engineers don't carry all the parts they need. They have to order and wait 2 days before the part comes in and have them, finish the repair they are trying to complete. So I guess budgets, restrictions, and understanding of the reality of the customers and the field engineer is crucial. I guess that came up a few times within this discussion today. Gentlemen, I can't get enough of these discussions. I'm sure we can keep going for another 45 minutes or hour, and we'll have the chance to do that in the new year. I thank you all for being here today, for taking the time to contribute and share your experiences. And my hope, like yours, is that these talks will benefit field engineers, managers, and organizations. At the end of the day, everything revolves around the customer. We do what we do for the customer's sake, and customers have a mission in the society that they cannot accomplish without what we do. So thank you very much. I wish you all happy holidays, and we'll see you again in 2026.